Hello and welcome to Face to Face, a discussion program with people from Victoria. Our guest today is Stan Dzbik. Stan is representing the Victoria Labour Council, an organization which I think a lot of us maybe don't know much about and which is worth knowing more about. Stan, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and the Victoria Labour Council?
Hi, my name is Stan Dzbik, and I'm on the executive of the Victoria Labour Council. And like many people in the labour movement, I wear several hats. I'm also the president of Local 456 of the International Association of Machinists. And where I work, which is the Department of National Defence, I'm on the executive of the Dockyard Trades and Labour Council, which is a poly-party organization which looks after the 11 unions that represent employees at DND.
So there's 11 unions at DND?
That's correct. At the Fleet Maintenance Facility, Cape Breton, which is the component that does the repairs to the ships.
How many people are in your small group at that?
At DND, yeah. There are about 950 tradespeople at DND.
Represented by?
Represented by the Dockyard Trades and Labour Council.
Okay. So that's not small at all?
No, it's not too bad.
How many unions make up the Victoria Labour Council?
The Victoria Labour Council has over 25 unions. It's all in the Victoria region, and probably about 40 locals of those unions. It represents about 23,000 people in Victoria that belong to unions.
So the Victoria Labour Council representing 25 unions, did you say?
That's correct.
And about 23,000 people here in Victoria.
That's right.
So a fairly significant part of the population, especially when you throw in families and kids and
yes,
husbands and wives. What are a couple of the bigger unions and a couple of the smaller unions, just so we get a picture of who the Labour Council is?
Well, Victoria being the capital of BC, we have a lot of government workers, so BCGU is one of the bigger unions. QP is one of the other bigger unions. And we also have some of the smaller unions are actually the union that I belong to, the machinists. Basically the industrial unions, now that the industry seems to be disappearing from Victoria, they're getting a bit smaller. So shipbuilding industry, there's Boilermakers, there's Machinist Local 3, IBEW, the electricians, they're a bit smaller than the big government unions.
Maybe we can talk for a bit about the deindustrialization issue. Victoria used to be an industrial city, for better or for worse, or at least there was a lot of industry here, a lot of things made here. And Canada used to be more of an industrial country. I think mainly because of the free trade agreements. And I call them corporate free trade agreements because it seems to be big business that pushes for them, and our governments seem to represent big business more than any other segment of our society, so we get these free trade deals. And they've kind of deindustrialized us by shipping our jobs to low-wage countries, but allowing the products they make there to come freely into Canada. What's the union position on this, if you know?
Well, I think all labor organizations are against free trade simply for that reason, is that our jobs are being sent away to countries where they pay the people much less, where the safety standards are lower. And in return, we get these products, but they're not really any cheaper. They may be a penny or two cheaper, so the people that are profiting from it are the manufacturers or the distributors. And the good paying jobs, the manufacturing jobs that Canada used to have, they're disappearing. I mean, even in the last few years, we've lost over 300,000 manufacturing jobs in Canada. And they're being replaced by what? Part-time jobs, jobs at grocery stores or Walmart, or it's hard to say that. I mean, obviously, you're not going to get good paying jobs coming back if all the economy is being moved to third world countries for the profit of corporations.
And not only are the jobs going, so we lose the wages, but every time we buy something, the money goes overseas.
That's right.
The retailer takes his cut and pays a low wage to the person working in the store, but basically the manufacturing value of that product, whatever it is, from television sets to computers to clothes to shoes to basically everything we buy, shavers, you name it, this pen, all that money flows out too. And personally, I think, and I'm not sure, but I think that is one of the fundamental reasons for this economic crisis or disaster that we're in right now, both here and in the United States. It's because we've basically allowed the corporations to ship all our jobs overseas. And the wealth has gone with that, and now we've suddenly found ourselves in big trouble. Is that kind of...
Yeah, you could say that one of the elements of the economy going down is the fact that a lot of the manufacturing here that would keep the taxes going, keep the services going in our country, they're not available anymore. The money that's going to purchase these things are leaving the country and going to third world countries, or actually they're not even really going to the third world countries, because the corporations that employ people in third world countries are really the ones that are making the most from it. Let's
go back to the Victoria Labour Council. Maybe you can tell us a bit about the history of the Labour Council.
Okay, the Victoria Labour Council first started in 1890. And back then, Victoria was the largest and wealthiest city in BC. It's hard to believe that now with Vancouver, but a lot of manufacturing in Victoria, a lot of craft unions, and unionization was just starting to become more common in the 18th century, or the 1800s, I should say. And a lot of these groups of people in the unions wanted to get together with other working people and try to lobby governments and political action for better working conditions, for safety, and that was how the Victoria, actually was originally called the Victoria Trades and Labour Council. That was how it started in 1890. And it survived through the First World War, through the Depression, through the Second World War as well. And just before the Second World War, there was a bit of a splitting off, because the two main labor organizations in the States and in Canada had a bit of a feud. And so there was also something called the Victoria Labour Council with the Canadian Congress of Labour, and there was the Victoria Trades and Labour Council with the... So in any case, they after the war, they got together, and it became the Victoria Labour Council, as the name is today.
What does the Labour Council do, and what has it done in the past? Maybe you can just give us a bit of the history in terms of issues fought for and won or lost.
Well, even back through the 20th century, some of the things that the Labour Council was fighting for was for an 8-hour work day. And actually originally it started as a 9-hour work day, and then when they got that, they wanted an 8-hour work day. They fought for the right for women to vote. They fought for safer work conditions in industrial places or in forestry. They've also tried to have people who were friendly to labor elected to municipal governments and to provincial governments, and that continues to this day. The Labour Council is the political action wing, you could say, of organized labor in Victoria.
You mentioned a 9-hour workday and an 8-hour workday. What did it used to be? Because most people, especially younger people today,
it depending on where you work, and that was the legal limit, but it was even more than that. I think some places it was like 11 hours a day, 6 days a week.
So people were working 66 hours a week, probably 50 hours a week in a lot of jobs, which isn't fun. I mean,
no, you spend your whole day working.
And that was one of the big reasons, I guess, why the labor unions were formed a century or 2 centuries ago, and why at some points in our history they've been very powerful. I would say today the labor unions are not powerful, which is to the detriment of this country, because labor, I think, deserves to have a voice, and a more powerful voice than it's got now. It's all of us seem to be off to the side these days, and big business and the politicians run the country for their own benefit. But has the labor movement, either locally or Canada-wide, been more powerful in the past?
I think at its peak, the labor movement was probably after the Second World War, when there was lots of manufacturing. at that time, and the economy was going fairly well. Europe was rebuilding, so there was a lot of demand for manufactured goods in Europe, and it just seemed that at the time the labor movement was progressing. They achieved a 40-hour work week for people. They got Saturdays were off. They managed to get pensions and health care legislated into existence, and pensions for unions. They would start looking after those as well. And there seemed to be a lot more power on their part, because there was more people that were organized. There were more large industrial firms where you could organize better, and they required people to work steady. You couldn't just say, okay, we'll have people coming in part-time for 4 hours a day, for 20 hours a week, and that sort of thing. So the fact that the working conditions were different, I think, helped it.
And also, I think in the past, the corporate sector wasn't as powerful as it is now, because there used to be hundreds of corporations, dozens in a single industry. And over the last 20 or 30 years, that's been, it's been changed. So now there are just a few very large corporations in many fields. And they've basically taken over, at least until today, when all of them seem to be coming apart, for better or for worse.
It seems to be a cycle, because again, at the turn of the last century, you had these huge companies like Standard Oil, and even on Vancouver Island, the mining concerns, Dunsmuir's coal mines, and they fought really hard to keep organized labor, keep unions out of their businesses, and it was only, I think, through circumstances that the war required these companies to be working, and not just the mines and oil, but manufacturing as well, that the war effort required these companies to carry on working, and they were forced essentially to allow unions to have some say in the workplace.
What are the big issues today for unions locally and in BC?
Locally, I think one of the big things is the economy, and everyone's talking about it. And even though in Victoria we've yet to see a real effect from it, other than housing prices coming down a little bit, I think we're going to see quite a bit more. The lumber industry has been hard hit in BC long before this economic crisis officially started. We've been losing people in the forest workers. I think there have been 26,000 forest workers lost since 2001. 26,000 forestry workers have lost their jobs. So we don't feel that much in Victoria, but people outside of Victoria, people that work in the industry in those small communities, they really get the effect of that. And a large part of that is due to changes in government policy. Governments seem to be keen on deregulating everything and trying to get as much advantage for the corporations as possible, deregulating safety regulations, deregulating environmental regulations, and even with forestry at one time, if you wanted to cut down a certain amount of wood, you had to put up a mill in order to justify allowing you to take those trees out. And now that's all done. We ship out raw logs, and mills are closing.
Right, so it used to be that if you were cutting down trees in a certain area, there had to be a mill there to process those trees, which provided jobs.
That's right.
And now even that, and we had in BC, I think, the worst jobs record in the industrialized world per tree. I mean, I saw the numbers many times. It was pathetic. I mean, it was one job per 1,000 cubic meters, something like that, in BC 10 years ago, whereas other jurisdictions had 2, 3, 4 jobs per 1,000 cubic meters. So even at the best of times, the logging companies treated BC as a third world state and just extracted resources in the worst possible way and didn't provide jobs. And now it's even worse.
No, that's true. I mean, now they're even on their own lands where it's not economical enough for them to log them. They want to subdivide them and build condos on them.
Right.
And the government's allowing them to do that. In fact, they're changing laws to allow them to do that.
So we have to ask ourselves who the government is working for. That's always a big question. And if we want that much power to be in the hands of the politicians and the corporations who they represent. Let's go to the 2008 municipal election. I think that was fairly important for the Victoria Labour Council. Maybe you can just tell us a bit about what you tried to do during that election.
Okay, the Victoria Labour Council in 2008 decided to do a process of vetting politicians which asked for our support. And in the past, it was a bit more informal. And the problem with that was that you would support a politician for an election, and then come time when they get elected, and they're voting against issues which Labour would want supported. So this time, what we did is we had politicians that were interested in our support. We had them fill out survey sheets, and they did interviews. And out of the about 30 or so, 35 people that asked for our support, I think 3/4 of them we supported. And of those, over 2/3 won what they were running for, be it a councillor or mayor or the school board trustee. So, and that's not too bad. And that was that's been a policy now from the Canadian Labour Congress, asking the Labour councils to do that, to try to support local politicians. And across BC, I think that it was over 75% of the politicians that were supported by their Labour councils won in the election. And the idea behind that is that if we're going to change this society, we have to start from the bottom, from the grassroots. The municipal arena of politics is the one that affects people the most, even though they don't really think about it. I mean, the bylaws change, and you go from having a 4-story height limit to a 10-story height limit, and then the next thing you know, you have a 10-story apartment building next to your house, and that's all because you didn't bother voting, and that's or even showing up to your council meetings. I mean, the voter turnout rate for municipal elections is around 20 to 30%, which is pretty bad.
Yeah, it's very low, and I agree with what you say that municipal government is very important for us. So is provincial. And are you happy with, let's take the City of Victoria, for example. Are you happy with the makeup of that particular council?
Well, I think it's too soon to tell yet. We did get a number of people that we supported on that council, and I guess it's only been about 3 months since the election, so I'm not going to make any judgments yet. We'll see after about a year if they're working out according to what they told us, or at least the people that we supported. Because I mean, we can't really say anything about the people that ran without our support and perhaps have their own agenda or somebody else's agenda.
What about the upcoming provincial election? The two main parties, I mean, I probably support the Greens myself, but the two parties who are going to win the majority of seats, probably all the seats as usual, the Liberals and the NDP. Labour, of course, has a history of supporting the NDP. Do you want to comment at all about the Gordon Campbell government and their record over the last 8 years?
Well, I think the Campbell government hasn't been a friend of organized labour, that's for sure. It started out right away with their Bill 29 and the way they rolled back wages on hospital workers and took away seniorities, and basically they disregarded the rights of so many people, working people, especially people that were organized in unions, and it took a Supreme Court case in order to get those rights back.
Maybe we can talk a bit about Bill 29, because I mean, basically my understanding is that it especially affected workers from the Hospital Employees Union, the HEU, people who were making wages of $17 to $20 an hour. Am I right?
Yeah, not even that. I think $18 an hour was their top wage.
Okay, say around $18 an hour. People serving food in hospitals and cleaning hospitals and doing maintenance as well, and other jobs. And basically what the Campbell government did was put in private companies in place, because these people used to work for the hospitals themselves. The Campbell government put private companies in place, and reduced those wages essentially to the poverty level. I don't know what they were making after Bill 29 went through, but $10, $12 an hour?
That's my understanding. It was they lost about $5 or $6 an hour. The ones that were hired back at the lower rate for the private companies.
Yeah. I mean, this was a vicious attack, not only on unions, but just on people. I mean, how dare a government who I think promised not to do that, to then, once elected, just step in, tear up the contracts, and basically throw people into poverty. It's bad enough when people are in poverty already, but to take others by the hundreds and by the thousands, really, and just cut their wages by $5, $6 an hour. I mean, this is...
No, it was despicable, and it's a good thing they did take it to court, because now the Supreme Court has ruled that collective bargaining is a charter right, and that governments can't just arbitrarily do whatever they want, change the law to suit themselves. And even though they did win, the government monetarily, I think, still came out ahead, because not everyone who was hurt by Bill 29 is actually going to get money from it. And I'm not exactly sure how they're dividing up the settlement, but for the most part, I think the government is quite happy with what it did. It has absolutely no shame in what it did.
No, it's a corporate government, and if it can take money from people who are working and turn it into profits and wages at the managerial level and the executive level, that's what they like to do, and that's what we're saddled with. The role of the media in all this is also very important, because we never hear about the people from the Hospital Employees Union who lost those jobs. But once, just once in the last 5 years, one day I was listening to CFAX radio, and they had on a union representative, which they frequently have on, but along with her was somebody who actually was working in the union and had their wages cut. And she told a story that was absolutely horrible, and really a story that we never hear. It was a story of having gone from from a regular life where, you had enough money to pay the rent, buy the food, and survive, to a situation where it was, do you pay the rent or do you feed the kids? As Mel Hertig's book asked the question. And she was having to live with that month after month and year after year, because it doesn't get any better. And just the other day, I went to listen to a talk by a fellow called Seth Klein from the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. And part of his talk was a tape recording of another woman who was in the same situation and working 2 jobs because she was a single parent. Both of them at minimum wage or close to minimum wage. One was a cleaning job in not a hospital, but I think a seniors care place. And her life is now work because she has to take care of her child or children. I don't remember which it was. So we keep losing.
Oh, I know. It's a horrible thing. It seems like the government doesn't have any empathy for the people down at the bottom of society. I'm not going to say the bottom of society, because these are people who are working, but they're the working poor now. And there's no sympathy. The minimum wage hasn't been increased in 8 years. The jobs in those hospitals, I've spoken to people that are working for the private contractors now, and they not only do they underpay them, but they understaff. So the people go there, they work, and they work for a short time, and next thing you know, they're burnt out and they have to leave. They can't stay there any longer. So there's just a turnover of people, and as a result, we have incidents like we had in Victoria not long ago in the old age home, where the people weren't being treated well, the food wasn't very good, and it's simply neglect. It's neglect by the government, and the people that work there eventually, they don't have the strength to be able to care anymore. They're being neglectful as well.
Yeah. And it kind of tends to go on and on. In Scotland, I just read on the internet, have you heard this? They have, the government of Scotland has said no more privatization of cleaning or food services in hospitals, and those that have been privatized will be rolled back as soon as the contracts expire. So they're going back to the situation that we used to have here in BC. And the reason is the hospitals are becoming so dirty that they're having more and more infection, and they feel the only way to fight that is to get their cleaning staff back working for the hospitals instead of for private contractors and paying them a decent living wage. Now, I don't know if you want to go into this particular spot, but the leadership of the HEU signed an agreement that the membership didn't want back when that ended, because there was going to be people were talking about a general strike, and then right in the middle of it, all of a sudden the deal was signed, and the person who signed it then disappeared. Do you know that story?
I'm not too familiar with what exactly happened there, and what was that? It was about 2002 or 2003. Yeah, and I wasn't really involved with the organized labor at the time, so I don't think I can comment on it, even from the point of view of someone who's not in the HEU.
Yeah, I just remember that there was a lot of support for the people who worked for the HEU, and then all of a sudden the leadership of the union signed the deal, which the workers were absolutely shocked by, and they were thrown into this mess that they have to live with. Let's talk about a couple of other provincial government bills. First of all, TILMA.
TILMA, Trade, Investment, and Labor Mobility Act.
Yes.
And that's something that I know that organized labor does not support that, because it's just a sneaky way of deregulation, more deregulation. And TILMA right now is an agreement between BC and Alberta. And it's supposedly that there are trade restrictions, interprovincial trade restrictions, but there have been experts that have looked at it and said there's not really that many interprovincial trade restrictions. And I think recently they were using the example of apprenticeable trades or tradespeople being able to move between province to province. Well, that's always existed. BC had the red seal for their journey people. And if you wrote the exam and got your red seal, you could work anywhere in Canada. But when they took over, they started to basically disassemble the apprentice system and make it harder for people to train as journey people.
TILMA is a big deal. Most people haven't heard about it because there's really nothing in the media about it. You could live in this province and not even know that TILMA existed. It's not fully implemented yet, but I believe it's partially implemented and will be fully in position in April of this year. And what it really does is, and this is the area that the politicians nor the media will ever talk about, it gives individuals and corporations the right to sue the provincial government if there is rules or regulations at the municipal level, in school boards, in health authorities, anywhere, that even Crown corporations, I believe, although I could be wrong. If there is a lower standard in Alberta for something that will impact corporate profit, if it's a lower standard in Alberta than there is in BC, then BC has to come down to the lower standard, and vice versa. So in other words, what TILMA does is it will further deregulate and bring everything down, labor standards, zoning standards, health standards, environmental standards. It brings everything down to the lowest common denominator between the two provinces. And as other provinces join the agreement, which is what they want, then everything will be ratcheted further down to the lowest of 3 provinces or 4 provinces. Is that your understanding?
That seems to be what TILMA is about, is allowing corporations to sue governments for infringing on their ability to make a profit. And part of that is regulation. If one province has a regulation, for example, in the schools not to sell candies, and the candy manufacturer in the other province feels that that's discriminating against them, they could perhaps take the school board to court and say that you're discriminating against my ability to make a profit. And I mean, this is all hypothetical, but the potential is there for that. And part of TILMA is that all the provinces have different regulations, and ideally, if TILMA goes through and the entire country is all in accord with TILMA, then that makes it easier for the government to try to push the SPP, which is the North American Integration or the Security Prosperity Partnership, which is something else that's been kept very quiet.
Do you want to say a few words about the Security and Prosperity Partnership?
Well, that's a North American Union, essentially. I mean, you could sum it up with Canadian resources, Mexican labor, and American manufacturing, American jobs. As far as that goes, I think the American market would be using the two in order to make more money for themselves.
Make more money for corporate America and corporate Canada too.
Yeah, the corporations in Canada would benefit from that as well, and the corporations in Mexico. But I think the people wouldn't really benefit from it. I mean, we would. We're already on the way to becoming more industrialized. We would become a plantation economy for the Americans.
You mean more deindustrialized?
Yeah, deindustrialized. Yes,
that's true. What do you think is going to happen with the auto industry, for example, in Ontario? I think they've already taken big hits over the last few years, and I assume it's only going to get worse.
Yeah, it's hard to say right now with GM on the verge of bankruptcy and Chrysler just laid off one shift of workers in Brampton. So, I mean, the market will be there eventually. And what the auto manufacturers want is they don't want actual grants from the government. They just want loans to tide them over. And the reason they can't get these loans is because the banks screwed up. The banks aren't allowing for credit anymore, so they can't get these loans. They can't retool their lines to sell products to people. People can't get loans in order to buy their product. So it's kind of a vicious circle. I think it's in order for us to have a auto manufacturing industry, I think that behooves the government to give them the loan and tide them over until times are better. I mean, they'll have to pay it back. But in this case, I think it's even more important with what happens in the States and what President Obama does with the auto manufacturing there, because these are all branch plants of American companies, and we could put a lot of money in there, and they can go bankrupt, and we won't see that money.
Now, there used to be an agreement called the Auto Pact, which said that for every car purchased in Canada, one car had to be manufactured in Canada. Now, the Auto Pact disappeared because of NAFTA, I think. And once the Auto Pact was gone, then we had to start paying the auto companies hundreds of millions of dollars over the last 10 years, literally hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, because they kept saying, we don't have to be in Canada anymore. We're going to move to the United States, or we're going to move to Mexico, or we're going to move to China, unless you, the government of Canada or the government of Ontario, give us $100, $200 million. And we've done this many times. Whereas we used to have the Auto Pact. What was wrong with an agreement like that? Every car that's sold in Canada has to be made in Canada. Now, from a labor point of view, that's pretty good. From an environmental point of view, it may be a disaster. But
I think it's, once the Auto Pact was gone, it's been good and bad, because for a while there the Canadian dollar was low, and we were actually selling more than one, producing more than one car for every car we bought. But again, we were being held hostage by the manufacturers to say, well, we'll go to Mexico and build our cars there. And so basically we were subsidizing the industry to stay here, or the government was subsidizing the industry.
Maybe you can say a few words about Bill 42, going back to the upcoming provincial election. Bill 42, what's the name of it?
Bill 42 is, I guess, you could call it the election gag law, or the pre-election gag law, and it's a bill that was passed by the Liberals just last year, and they were in a hurry to pass it because they were concerned about third-party advertising coming up to an election. The previous election, a number of the unions had an advertising campaign that brought to attention what the Liberals were doing with our schools, what they were doing with our hospitals, and they were actually quite successful ads. I think one of the things that many people don't know is that the Liberals in the election in 2005, they only lost by about 2,000 votes, and that's if you go at the really close ridings. So they came fairly close to losing the election, and that was largely due to the work that organizations like the BC Fed and BC Teachers Federation, HEU, all these third parties were advertising, trying to point out that what the Campbell government has done. So they don't want that to happen this time. They've put out a gag law that won't allow third-party advertising, and which basically leaves it in the hands of the parties to advertise for themselves. And now the Liberals, as we know, are backed by corporations, and they get most of their money from big business, whereas the NDP and even the Greens, it's to a large part, it's small private donations. I mean, the NDP is supported somewhat by organized labor, but the amount of money they get pales in comparison to what the BC Liberals get.
You mentioned ads were run talking about what they've done to our hospitals and what they've done to our schools, the Liberal government. What have they done to our hospitals and our schools, if you know?
Well, the schools, for example, at the time they were closing schools down, and it carried on since the election. I mean, right now we have 177 schools that have been closed throughout BC.
Since when?
Since 2001.
You know, it's funny, those are the kind of statistics, 177 schools closed, that one simply doesn't know about. Somehow that bit of information never gets through. I mean,
no.
That to me, that's a shocking number.
No, and for example, for the school situation, they manipulate the statistics. They say that, well, the enrollment numbers are dropping, but how they do that is that if one school may be close to being full and another school might have 3/4 of the student, 3/4 of capacity, and then they say, well, this school isn't full and we're going to have to perhaps move the students to another school. And I mean, something very similar happened here in Esquimalt itself with Lamson's school in Macaulay.
Yes, I know people who are furious about that.
You know, this is, and my daughter went to Macaulay, and I told her what was happening. She's going, you got to be kidding. They're going to try to put all those students from Lamson in there. There's not enough room for the students already. But part of the thing was the school districts are being underfunded. So their way of trying to maintain the funding is to close these schools which are not 100% at 100% capacity, and then try and sell the lands in order to make some more money for themselves. But they're taking away something that belongs to the public, belongs to the people.
A couple of years ago, I visited my daughter's school. She went to, pretty nice elementary school at that time. And I was actually, I didn't visit the school. I mean, it was Parents' Day or whatever it's called, and I went there, along with many other parents. The room was dirty. I was surprised. I had never, I don't remember being in a school that was dirty, and it kind of took my breath away. Is there? I mean, what's the reason behind this? What is the Liberal government trying to do to our schools?
Well, again, they're underfunding. They're underfunding the schools. I believe that the caretakers now that used to have a caretaker that was at the school full time. Well, now you have caretakers that drive between schools in the
Yes.
evening from one school to another, and they're not given enough time to do a proper job, similar to what's happening in the hospitals. So the bare minimum is being done, if you want to even call it that. And again, they're saving money, but they're saving money at whose expense?
Well, I went to a talk years ago, and the fellow was saying that this is a move to privatize the schools. Just as they want to privatize our healthcare system, they intend to privatize schools as well. And certainly I would say that's the case, because I remember, like, St. Michael's. It used to be a bit dowdy, and, it wasn't that nice and a little bit dirty. But now you go past St. Michael's, it's like a palace. All kinds of building going on, everything looks wonderful, and you go past the public schools, they look dowdy.
Well,
Is that by accident?
I don't think it's by accident. I mean, the private schools are getting funding from the government as well. I mean, even though parents are paying huge amounts for their children to go there, I mean, obviously they can afford it. If they can afford $12,000 a year tuition plus, I guess for a place like St. Michael's, they're fairly well off, and with the province helping keep these schools built up, I think part of the government's policy is to let things fall apart through neglect and just say, we don't have the money to fix it, we're going to have to privatize it. Let's have this private school, this private corporation take over and let it run. And they're doing that with the schools. They're doing that with the hospitals.
They're doing it with our hydro. They're doing it with our roads. They want to do it with our water.
With everything. It's just, it's too expensive to, basically everything's it's too expensive to fix. We're going to have to privatize it. It's cheaper to sell it off than it is to actually invest money into it.
And a part of that is the other trick they play, which is to reduce government revenues by cutting taxes, especially for corporations and the rich. When they do that, we all get a bit of a tax cut. But for people like me, it's maybe $200 or $300 a year, $4 a week, $5 a week. You don't even notice it. But for somebody with big money, they're talking $10,000 or $20,000 a year, and a lot more for some people. And so that's why the government says it doesn't have money now, because it's basically giving that money to people who already probably earn too much.
Well, yeah, it's pretty much it. I mean, they can say all they want about the giving a 5% tax cut. The people that benefit from are the people that actually earn a lot of money. So,
let's just move to the recent federal budget. You said there was something there, a Bill C-10?
That's right. Well, the budget, I can even begin with it. The budget is a bit of a, I don't know how to describe it, a bit theatrical, because as we all know that we almost had the government fall because they refused to admit that there was an economic problem back in December. And so now they've come up with this budget that somebody commented on it once, that it's a budget with fiscal stimulus by a government that doesn't believe in fiscal stimulus. So they're pushing forward this budget. The Liberals have decided that they're going to support them regardless of what happens. And the budget itself is probably has some good points and bad points, but there's a thing called Bill C-10, which is the Budget Enabling Act. And what that's doing, there's a lot of different things, ideological things, which the government is hiding in that act as part of the package that's the budget. And for example, they are in Bill C-10, which is actually a 551-page document, so it's not something that's light reading. They're hiding things in there like charter. They're taking away the charter rights of women workers in the federal public service.
Maybe you can just talk about that for a minute.
Okay. Well, one of the things they're doing is that they're not allowing them to argue pay equity cases before a tribunal with the help of a union. If a union tries to help a woman go before the board and argue a pay equity case, then the union will be fined $50,000 for doing that. So what happens is that the only way that pay equity can be negotiated is through collective bargaining, which is pretty difficult when the government turns around and says, no, we're not going to go there.
So the situation before was that a union could help and work for pay equity for women.
That's right.
Now you can't.
And now they can't.
And to me, the amazing thing about that is, I'm somebody who's interested in these kinds of issues. I've never heard that before.
No.
And the way it's kept secret is remarkable.
Well, it is. There's other things as well. Like, I mean, even in my case, like I mentioned that I work at D&D. Well, our contract expired in 2006, and the one that we negotiated with the Treasury Board, and it was rejected by 89% of the membership, and the decision was to go to binding arbitration. Well, the Treasury Board dragged out the situation so that we didn't go to binding arbitration until a year and a half after our vote against the contract. And what we got in binding arbitration at the time was an economic adjustment to bring our wages in line with the private shipbuilding industry that's here in Victoria, and the Treasury Board mandated pay increases. And people were happy with that, but then the Bill C-10 came out, and in Bill C-10 there's a restraint portion of it which says that any binding arbitration or any collective agreements that were negotiated after December the 8th are considered not to exist.
And so you're limited to a pay increase of?
We're limited to a pay increase of what Treasury Board mandated, which is considerably less than what we got in binding arbitration. Now, you imagine that binding arbitration is binding on both sides, but they rewrote the law to basically say that, well, okay, it's binding, but we don't actually believe that it's binding. So, and again, that contravenes the recent charter decision that the hospital workers won, that collective bargaining is a right.
I think we've noticed that over the last 10 or 15 years. What has happened is that the working people have taken a big hit because basically wages have not even kept up with inflation. And I know where I work, you know, I mean, it's been like 1%, 2%, 3%, 2%, 0% over the last 10 years. And I think all working people, not all, because if you're in an industry that happens to be growing a lot or where there's a lot of dough, you know, maybe you're doing okay, but the middle class is being hit hard, has been hit hard, and certainly the working poor have been hit even harder, and all that money and wealth have basically been ratcheted up to the people at the top. And we see this growing gap between rich and poor. Personally, that's something I don't like, and I think that's something that unions, I think what unions try to do or should be doing is trying to work for a fairer and more equitable society. And I think that's what unions tend to do, and for that reason I give them a lot of support. You know, on one issue I may not like what unions are doing, on another issue I may not, but in general it's social fairness and wage fairness, and I think that only benefits the society.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's frustrating to see that in good times, you know, the excuse that's used is, well, we don't want to raise your wages too high because it'll make prices go up, or something like that. And then when times are bad, then they have to cut your wages because we can't afford it. And so there's always a reason not to give you a pay increase that is, you know, could be good, other than certain industries, or if you're the premier and you give yourself a 54% raise, or if you're a deputy minister and the premier gives you a 20% raise, then that's different. But, you know, it's for those people, it seems like that you have to pay more if you want to get the best. But for the labor class, then basically we want to pay you less and less.
And I have never seen the media or the government make the argument that profits shouldn't go up because that means that prices will go up. That's okay. Profits can go up to record levels, and they do year after year after year. But very often when people in the middle or the low end of the wage spectrum want to get a raise, somehow those raises, that's impossible because it's going to make prices go up. But that's the usual story we get from the corporate media. And it's propaganda. And I think it's time the union movement had a little more propaganda going.
Well, I think, yeah, the union movement unfortunately gets a lot of negative media coverage. I mean, the only time people pay any attention to organized labor or to a union is if there's a strike happening, or even, you know, something worse like violence at a picket line. Otherwise, the rest of the time they don't mention that 93% of collective agreements are settled without a strike, and that quite often having a union at a workplace keeps, you know, it keeps the stress levels down for the workers, because they don't have to worry about fighting management on their own. They know that they have backing.
It's a big issue, and maybe we'll, if we can, talk a little bit more about unions in the future. Thanks very much for watching. We've been talking to Stan Dzbik. Am I saying that right?
That's right.
Of the Victoria Labour Council. You've been watching Face to Face. Thank you very much.